All right. Welcome back to the PenAndPulse Podcast, where we discuss writing, literature, politics, and culture with a strong focus on African issues, but not limited to that, amplifying also young African voices at home and in the diaspora, but also not limited to young voices. Any of those that contribute to the overall discourse are welcome. So I'm your host, Phiwe Mhlope, and today we're doing a solo episode. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be doing more of these solo episodes as time goes on. Not because it's hard to get guests, but I think I'm trying to build something where I can also provide some value alone or something like that. This is going to be the first solo episode where I don't have a guest. I hope it goes well. I hope you like it too. But also, it's going to be an exciting one. I have a couple of things that I have planned out, which is to say I have a lot of people don't know who I am, so we're going to talk about me. Not the entire podcast before you click and go. No. While I don't want this podcast to be necessarily about me or any personalities in particular, but mostly about ideas only, I think for potential guests or just the people who have been following, I think it's important for me to just give a little bit about me and whoever this black man who has another microphone is, and why people should try and align themselves with what agenda he's on and the community he's building, etc., etc. So that's why I feel like it's important for me to do one of these where I have to, clarify or map the general idea behind the platform and also the general vision that awaits in the distant future, as I have envisioned it, and hopefully as the community that's going to grow here who is also going to envision it as. So if you're a regular subscriber and you're tuning in for the second time, or for you've been with us from the very beginning, thank you. Please, we appreciate you. Please like and share the video, and tell your friends to pull up, and then also come support the show. If this is your first time on the show, welcome. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and join the community. I also have a newsletter, the Pen and Pulse newsletter. It's on Substack. You'll find it in the link description below. It's basically where I decipher some of my thoughts and ideas, and it's where I try and error some articles before I send them out for publishing. So yeah, please also subscribe to that and also join the community, and I hope we have fun. So I have a couple of things planned today. I'm going to talk about a little bit of myself, who I am, what do I do, and why this podcast, whether or not we should limit podcast microphones. I think it's an important thing to talk about because I'm starting a podcast. So the conversation has been, this man, we should take away their microphones because people be saying a lot of stuff, and I'm people too. So there's just too much, there's an influx of alternative voices and opinions which also become truth, and that is dangerous. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about the overall vision of the podcast, why it exists and what I want for it, and what I hope from the possible community that it's going to rally behind this agenda. And stuff, yeah. And then lastly, there's going to be an altar call. Yeah, altar call. You heard that right. You know how at the end of like sermons, your reverend is going to be like, hey, those people who, I don't know if you're religious or not, but I grew up in a Christian church, so in a Christian household. So every time after church, like every after service, there'll be someone who's like, come forward if you want to be blessed or you want your sins to be washed away so that you may be as white as snow, so that they can lay hands on you, then you accept. So this is what we're going to do. Or there's going to be a call to action, basically, which is invite possible people who can come and help grow the community, but also share interesting ideas on the subject matter that we have been discussing with the former guests, and we're also going to be discussing with future guests, which fairly, I think we've been doing okay in terms of the level of conversation that we've been having so far. So yeah, thank you for being here and tuning in. So yeah, the podcast underwent a rebrand a couple of weeks ago. I had a co-host. She left. If anyone was asking themselves what happened to my co-host, she had to do other things, so the commitment wasn't going to work for her. Yeah, I know some people are like, nah, no, that's not true, But yeah, that's what happened. If you want any other details, or you're a journalist, or you can come to my DMs or go to her DMs so that, but come to my DMs first so that I don't know what question you're going to ask her. But we're okay, we're fine, we're cool, we're good friends. I talk to her like here and there. She's going to come on the podcast sometime, when she's got free time. But yeah, we're good. So that's why we had to rebrand the podcast so that it can be just one person who's hosting it. And then we have another person who's going to be a co-host. Who's going to be a guest. So something like that. So that's why the podcast underwent a rebrand. So why the Pen and Pulse? Maybe let's start there. Why the Pen and Pulse? The name. Before I tell you about myself, I think the name itself speaks to the very idea. Like, the pen is where everything starts. Like, a little bit about me. I'm a writer. Yes, I identify as a writer. Not identify as a writer. No, I am a writer. I don't know if I identify as a writer is a proper terminology to use in this climate that we're in. But yeah, I am a writer. But during the day, I have a normal 9 to 5, like a lot of other people. I work in software development, but yeah, I like writing, and that's where the idea of the pen comes from. We say the pen. So the pen is what gives life to everything. So I construe things from a writing perspective. Even sometimes the way I view life is through writing advice or just being informed by things I've read and or consumed by writers, even though it might not have been in a written format. So the pen to the pulse. You must admit that is really smart. If you don't agree, go argue with your ancestors. I'm joking. We still want you to subscribe, so please subscribe. Don't say this host is insulting people. No, I'm not insulting you, but yeah, go argue with your ancestors. It's a very smart name. So yeah, the Pen and Pulse podcast. So yeah, and that's a little bit about me. I'm a writer, so this is where the podcast comes from. It's like, first and foremost, I'm trying to write, like every other writer, possibly maybe, was trying to write the great American novel or African novel. I'm trying to write. So I'm trying to write that. I've been growing as a writer, and I've been interacting with writers behind the scenes. So I was like, what about if I could get these conversations to be archived online, And for me, I was like, okay, fine, there's already media that it's already talking about writers, talking to writers. My biggest YouTuber that I follow is David Perel, is the host of Why I Write. But no offense, though, to the podcast. It's like, it's very important in terms of representation when it comes to the guests and the type of literature to which is being talked about. So I thought maybe there is a deficiency of media that digs into literature about home and writers about home, because fair and fine, we consume a lot of nonfiction, all those things. But traditionally for us, the lessons were in the stories, embedded in the stories, and we know how to tell stories. And that's where I'm like, we don't have media that like really delves into that. It's there, but I don't think it is as pronounced as the alternative media on the other side. Hence my reason of also saying this podcast must exist in line with all the other podcasts or media that is already trying to channel voices from home. Home is a very diplomatic term in this sentence. Yeah, trying to channel all those ideas from home and take them to bigger audiences and stuff like that. And also podcasts in this genre of literature from home are still limited, and people haven't bought into the idea of podcasts and this kind of medium as much as they have in America or Europe or the free world. So yeah, that's basically the initial genesis or the initial idea that spares on the desire to build this platform. Of course, there's been many, many things beyond that. But at the baseline, it's that. Secondly, I was a debater in high school and in college, so I interacted with a lot of people who were very inquisitive about the world, who did not shy away from questioning life as it is, or questioning their beliefs, which they were brought up with, or stuff that had been instilled on them by maybe schools or some authority figures and stuff like that. So I was with those people for a lot. I mean, for long periods of time, especially in college. So we used to engage in those not deep, but I would say interesting conversations, basically, about exploring the world, things about religion. We'll talk about international relations, you talk about gender identities, you talk about identities per se, you talk about politics, you mention anything. If you are a debater, you know that everything is a topic for conversation. And at some point, you are made to defend things that you might not even agree with in real life, but you make a case for them and it stands. And you're like, yeah, this is why this should be like this, even though you don't subscribe to it and you don't believe in it. So on that second plane, there's a nostalgia for such conversations. But like I was having a conversation with my previous guest, Valentine Makoni, who's a debate enthusiast. You can go watch that video also. He was saying for some people, they were okay with just leaving those conversations in those debate rooms, which is fine. For some people, looked at it as a sport. Some people extended it into their law careers, the political careers, NGO organizations, you name it. For me, I was in the technology field, so I couldn't have those conversations as much as I would have wanted to, I guess, extending them outside my college or high school days. So that nostalgia is also bringing me to like resuscitate those conversations, because I feel like those conversations were very necessary and can exist on a platform like this, and people can find value in those conversations, especially if it's young minds who have who have nothing to lose or defend, at least for now, before we're a big podcast. But yeah, we're just free thinkers, questioning what is and why it is and possibly what it should be. So this is basically the secondary level of the existence of this podcast, which is to say, after we're done trying to learn from writers, we're done trying to learn from authors on how to write the great American novel, to write the great African novel. Let's discuss ideas. Also, those ideas are also there in those novels that people are writing. And these are issues that they're conveyed in written format, but also can be conveyed um, in a platform like this. So this is the secondary level of why I thought this podcast should exist. Personally, me being the one hosting it. So there's some selfish reason to it, but also I think there's a general collective value at the end of the day, which I hope you might find. If you don't, I don't know, man. Go ask your ancestors. I'm joking. Hey, people are gonna cancel me. I'm joking. Don't go ask no ancestors. It's just a figure of speech. On a third level, I have a very. I think I grew up in a very political home, and I think a lot of Zimbabwean youth are very politicized in the sense because we've witnessed, not the worst politics around the world. And if you had been involved in conversations like I was in, you already have a high affinity for politics. And with that affinity for politics, I think it's important to extend those conversations also to platforms like this because I can't have them anywhere else. I can't just call anybody in it. I mean, I can call people like that, but there's other guests or people who I don't even know that probably more informed and well educated and well read in such topics and young and vibrant. And we can have them on the show, and those conversations are amplified in that sense. Now, the second question then becomes, okay, there's a lot of podcasts, bro. Like, why are you the other guy who's starting another podcast when there's all those podcasts out here? So I'm trying to make a case for why this podcast should exist, which is very selfish in a sense too, because I'm trying to defend the existence of the Pen and Pulse podcast. But I think it's an important point to make, which is to say, the internet has become very beautiful in the sense that there's a lot of alternative media there's now a lot of alternative mediums for information dissemination and or consumption. Now, with that fact in mind, no one can have a monopoly on ideas. When I was reading Novio Violet's not Novio not Novio Violet. What's the author of Digging Stars? Novuyo Rosa Chuma. She wrote the book Digging Stars. She was in an interview the other time, and then she was talking about, hey, the book is basically about a girl who moves from Zimbabwe to go to America and try and learn geometry, I think. I can't remember. I read it a while ago. But there's a lot of talk about Bantu geometry and the idea that even Africans had an identity for geometry before geometry studies existed. It's like we had names for stars, we had names for the moon, and we had names for all those other things that you see in the sky. And there were people who would study those things and they would come up with theories for those things before the person who came and theorized it into books and called it geometry came. Yeah, political correctness. So she was saying that her also writing that book about with the exploration of Bantu geometry was in a sense to show that nobody has a monopoly on information and ideas. Even Africans do have access to that information and rights to information and stuff like that. So the point I'm trying to make is, in the world now that we're living in, it's beautiful because with existence of alternative media, no one has monopoly on ideas and information dissemination. We saw that with the American elections. It's like mainstream media and the news, was taking an L. against the podcasters, was taking an L. So it's that thing. So what that does is it neutralizes the fact that the people who propaganda, basically, I grew up in Zimbabwe. There was one radio station. There was one TV station and just a few couple of radio stations, but most of them were state owned. So what happens in those instances is that whatever you're being told on the national broadcaster is what you're going to believe because you don't have any alternative media. It's basically something like that, right? So no one has control over what could be truth. And I think that's a beautiful thing, right? Of course, with every good thing comes bad apples, but we can't say social media is bad because people are now addicted to social media, and then social media has shows a lot of people nudity, etc., etc. Of course those could be good arguments, but social media in isolation is fine by theorization of saying this is how it's going to exist and connect people. People in their being human beings, basically, eventually terrorize what could have been a good thing and make it what it is, right? So it's those things. So it's like, yeah, there's going to be far extremes, and I'm not saying I'm not either of those. I'm just saying it's beautiful, though, that there's a plethora of options for you to pick, right? And it's good because if there's a plethora of options for you to pick, you can pick the voice you like. Even if they're talking about the same topic, you can listen about. If they're talking about cars, you can listen to other guys who you like their voices or how they look or sound versus the other guy who maybe talks about cars and well informed but doesn't have the charisma or whatever it is. So there's that, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Two, also, I think it's a beautiful thing because the internet has created a space where you can just have your own corner on the internet. And when you have your own corner on the internet, and then you can have a community of people who also align with your interests, that is good. Austin Kleon, I don't know how you say it, the author of How to Steal Like an Artist. Is it? Yeah, and show your work. He says the beautiful thing about the internet is you can just put out whatever you think is your interest out there, and you're always going to find people who share the same interest. You'll be surprised how big this world is on YouTube or whatever, and how much people are into the things that you're into. So if you can't find a community next to you, you can find it online. So I think this is another beautiful thing about this. There's value in that. And for me, the community could come, you could not come, but I think that's another beautiful thing. It's like in your own little corner, you can also find like-minded people who are trying to grow in writing, who are trying to grow in understanding politics, who are trying to grow in issues about culture, who are trying to, find the best literature that's out there. So that's another thing. I think that's the beauty thing of the internet. But a caution, though, I would say is that when you're starting a podcast, I'm not giving advice. It's something I would say to myself also. I'm just like, if you're starting a platform like this with the hope to blow up, I think from the very initial stages of the podcast or whatever platform you started, you failed, right? I think you should have that conception at the back of your head, but you should generally just want to grow the platform so that you can have fun doing it and find like-minded people who are also interested in things that you like, etc., etc. And those things are going to be fulfilling in a sense more than trying to count the metrics at least every time, because hey, that is depression. you're going to be depressed. So yeah, that's basically how I would define the existence of this podcast. So now that I've made that good case, you need to subscribe and share this podcast and like. And the most important thing is to subscribe. Now, the overall vision of the podcast, right? What do I have planned? It's 2025. It's a new year. I think it's a good way. It's a good place to start and talk about vision. Everybody's talking about the vision for the year, their dreams and goals for the year. I think I could also outline the goals and vision for the podcast here right now. One, I want to talk to as many young people and young voices with the same curiosity about writing and the nature of politics, or who are into sharing the culture of home and blending those intersectionalities and coming up with solutions that could make life better, that could give the skills so that each and everyone who's listening to this, or myself, or the person who's going to be a guest, can create better work, especially in the writing area. So that's one. And I hope and trust that as the podcast grows, basically there's going to be a lot of good content that is going to be very helpful. Secondly, I think it's important to create an archive. Like, I was watching a lot of a lot of videos of Gungi Wationgo. I don't know that's how you pronounce it. And Chinua Achebe, being interviewed, and then they're reading a section of their book. I think those platforms that exist already. And I was like, imagine if podcasts existed back in the day when those guys were writing the books. They are considered one of the greatest African writers, right? But it's hard to find interviews with them. Like, it's really hard to find. Like, if you say, yeah, you can find them, but they're not as distilled as you would in today's podcast. They would, right? So I think it's important to create more archives of such conversations because there's value in that, and I've been learning from watching those videos, and there's no limits to creating content like this. And yeah, that's that. Third goal or vision, I think I want to collaborate with many like-minded platforms that amplify such discourse, and see what we can conjure up and what type of solutions or ideas we can engage on and bring forward and maybe make me, them, or the world a better place. Which may sound like a utopia, the idea of making the world a better place. But if we're not trying to live our lives to the highest form of good, then what are we doing? So every day is, if we're attempting to move closer to the highest form of good, be it or for the individual or for the world, I think it's a life well worth lived. So yeah, you can do this anywhere else and not on this platform too. It's fine, but that's just my goal for the podcast. Lastly, I don't want this platform. I wish that this platform is not limited to Zimbabweans only. There's a huge market pool of thinkers, young thinkers who are from Africa in the diaspora, who are doing great things, who are writing and writing like beautiful stories and stuff like that. I want those people to be on the show. I wish for those people to come on the show. And that would be a huge thing for me because I don't want the identity of this to be Zimbabwean. I don't want it to be extremely African, although particularly African is fine. But yeah, that's basically what it's going to be. So if there's those young people who are in those spaces and are doing great things and inspire me, I would like to have them on the show so that I can grow and you can grow as well. So that's just about it. That's the Pen and Pulse podcast, the vision for the podcast. All right, lastly, The altar call. So the altar call basically is me begging you to come to the show. Okay, so the altar call is me saying, now that you've heard what this podcast is about, who I am, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below. Or shoot me a DM or email, whatever. It's easy to find me. Very easy to find me. Like I was saying, after a beautiful sermon, you need to call people forward so that you can lay hands on them and then pray for them. Or you need a call to action. So my call to action is, if you are the person I'm talking about, please, when you see my email and I'm like, hey, would you want to do this? Please don't snub me. I mean, come on. It's for the greater good. But secondly, forget the numbers, man. Yeah, I'm fine. We're at 100 subscribers. Wink, wink. We're at 82. We're at 100. I'm not counting, by the way. We're at 100 subscribers. What am I doing on this platform? No. Don't worry about the numbers. Worry about the value and quality of the conversation, man. That's what's important. You come on the show, put value into the world, man. That's what we need, you know? You got nice ideas, you're a great writer, and you inspire me. Just pull up to the show, you know? And then we're going to have a nice conversation. And you're going to be the one, when the story is told, that you were there for me in the beginning. No, not for me, but you were there in the beginning of the story. And that would be beautiful. And you can become a friend of the show. You can always come back when the show has blown up, but it's not suicide to come on the show, or it's very initial stages. Like, no, it's not career suicide. I will not be asking any questions that will get you cancelled or myself cancelled. Trust me, that's the last thing I wish. Especially in my young stages as is. So yeah, that's what I would say. There's going to be a link in the description below. It's a Google form. And if you know young African writers or thinkers who'd want to come on the show, you can just write on the form if you're just suggesting somebody, or if you are the somebody, you know, you leave an email, I'll reach out, I'll look, you know, I'll consume your work. If it's a book, I'll definitely read your book. I've been getting into a lot of African literature lately. I wasn't reading a lot of them a couple of years back, but I've been getting into my African literature back, and it's been very beautiful. I just finished reading Chido Muchemwa's Who Will Bury You and Other Stories. Beautiful book. Written also, she writes about queer relationships in a Zimbabwean context. That's something you want to read, because it's like, oh, okay, that's bold. What do you have to say? You know, things like that. Like, things like that is like, that move me from the edge of my seat. So yeah, pull up the show and then let's have some fun. And I hope it's going to be a blissful conversation. It's going to be a blissful year. And yeah, Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to everybody, you know, who's been supporting the show. So that's today's episode. It's very short, but yeah, I'm hoping to be doing many of these solo episodes as time goes on. It's gonna be me maybe imparting knowledge or wisdom from books I've read, or literature that I've read, etc., etc. We're going to see how we construe that. But in the moment, this is what we have for today. So, from the Pen and Pulse podcast, I'm your host, Phiwe Mhlope. Please like, subscribe, share, subscribe to the newsletter, and join the community. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.